Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. We continue now in part 2 of our topic on manufacturing operation. Okay, so we go a little bit detail from before we have mentioned about what type of role or things that the manager need to do, and how managerial accounting is used for. Okay, so when we go into detail, the managers might ask these kinds of questions in order for them to do the planning, to do the directing, and as well as controlling. So among the questions that they ask is what costs are involved in making a product or providing a service. Okay, they would be interested in what costs are used in providing the product. If we decrease production volume, will costs decrease? Okay, so they want to control the cost, so they would like to see whether if they could control the cost by decreasing production volume. They want to know if whether to decrease the cost, they would whether they could utilize automation. Okay, so these are the things that some of the questions that linger in the mind of managers, and to answer these questions they use managerial accounting information. So when we go even more detail, to answer some of those questions, they would need to understand the manufacturing cost. Okay, because the previous slide talks about a lot on the costs. Okay, the question on cost. So a major cost for manufacturing business is also is of course the manufacturing cost. So there are three major manufacturing costs for a manufacturing company, in terms of manufacturing costs, because there are other costs which are not manufacturing costs. But when we're talking about manufacturing costs, there are three types. Firstly is the direct material. So when a company, a factory produces products, then of course they need direct materials. So if a company produces cars, okay, automobiles, then they would need, of course, they would need the metals. Okay, they would need metals, or whichever type of metals that they use to produce cars. They would need tires. They would need cloth to produce the upholstery, the seats of the cars. So those are direct materials. Then they will have the direct labor, or people who are involved directly with the production. So people on the production line, those people who assemble the tires on the chassis of the cars. Okay, and then there's the manufacturing overhead, or all costs associated to the manufacturing process, but not within the direct, but not part of direct material, or not part of the direct labor. Okay, we will look into the details of each of these later on. Okay, firstly is the direct materials. Direct materials, a term that people usually use besides direct materials, is the raw materials. Okay, raw materials is basic materials and parts used in the manufacturing process. But in management accounting, mostly we use the term direct materials. Okay, it is raw materials that can be physically and directly associated with the finished product during the manufacturing process. So we know in cars there's a rubber part of the car which is made into tires. Okay, so those are direct materials. There are also some indirect materials. They are not physically part of the finished products. They are not physically part of the finished products. If we try to find it in the car that is produced, we do not find it, but it is used nonetheless. Okay, For example, particularly in indirect materials refer to those items that are impractical to trace to the finished product because their physical association with the finished product is too small in terms of cost. So, for example, when a company assembles cars, they might need some lubricants, or they might need some adhesive, okay, glue, okay, to join things together. Okay, they might use glue, but then to calculate the cost of glue on the product is insignificant. Okay, it's too small. So those things are considered as indirect materials. So those indirect materials is considered part of manufacturing overhead. Okay, because in the first slide we have here we have the direct materials. So direct materials do not include those materials that are used in the production but are too small to significantly consider part of the product. Like I said, like adhesive, like lubricants. Okay, and then there's the direct labor. Direct labor are work of factory employees that can be physically and directly associated with converting raw materials into finished product. The people who are directly involved, the work of the people that directly involved with assembling, converting the raw materials into the finished goods. Okay, but there's also the indirect labor, which means the work of factory employees that has no physical association with the finished product, or for which it is impractical to trace cost to the goods produced. Okay, so indirect labor, sometimes the factory manager is an indirect labor. So if, for example, if the factory manager does not come today, the product is still being produced. Okay, we can still see the cars coming out of the factory. But if the direct labor, the factory worker does not come, okay, the operators do not come, then the cars will not be assembled. So those kinds of labor will be associated with directly to the finished goods on raw materials. But people like the factory manager or the supervisor, the line supervisor, they are not directly involved with touching with the materials or converting the materials into finished goods. So those are called indirect labor. And indirect labor is also part of the factory overhead. Okay, manufacturing overhead. So manufacturing overhead is costs that are indirectly associated with manufacturing the finished product. Includes all manufacturing costs except direct materials and direct labor. So we have specifically say which type of cost goes into direct materials and direct labor, but other things associated with manufacturing will be grouped into manufacturing overhead. So also called factory overhead, indirect manufacturing costs or burden. So examples in manufacturing overhead could include the factory depreciation, the maintenance of the factory, maintenance of the machinery. Okay, then there's the electricity, the water, the utility bills of the factory. And like I said, the factory manager. Okay, these people are essential for running of the factory, but they are not directly related to the handling of the raw material and converting the raw materials into finished goods. Those are the main classification of cost of the manufacturing cost. Okay, so remember there's three: the direct material, the direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. These are manufacturing costs, also called as product cost, because these are costs that are attributable to product. Either can be attributed to the product directly, like the direct materials and direct labor, or can only be attributed to the product indirectly, which would be the manufacturing overhead. Okay, but for a company, for the manufacturing company, they do not only incur product costs or manufacturing costs, but they also incur other costs not related to manufacturing at all. And these are called period costs. Okay, so manufacturing companies would classify would have a main classification of their cost into product cost and period cost. Product cost will be all of the manufacturing costs, which will be divided into direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. But they also have period costs. Okay. So we will see on the next slide what are period costs. We're still talking about period costs, product costs. It says here costs that are integral part in producing the product recorded in the inventory account. So all costs related to the product will be embedded in the inventory if they are not sold. Once they are sold, they are considered as cost of goods sold. Okay. Once they are sold, they are considered as cost of goods sold. But otherwise, if they are not sold yet, they will be included in the inventory. What about period costs? Okay, period costs are charged to expense as incurred. So for example, the headquarters depreciation of their other fixed assets. So maybe they have transportation trucks. Okay, the cost of their accountant. Okay, their cost of their advertising, their selling, their marketing. Okay, the administration costs. So all those things are part of period costs because they are not associated with manufacturing. Okay, so these are period costs and they are charged to expense when they are incurred. So as a summary, a manufacturing company would have two major types of costs: the product cost, also known as manufacturing costs, and they have the period costs, which are non-manufacturing costs. And some of those costs, if we further break them down, will be the selling expenses and administrative expenses, whereas the manufacturing cost will be the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Okay, so in this subject we will be, or in this topic we will be focusing on the calculating of the manufacturing cost. We have covered non-manufacturing costs in our previous lectures indirectly. Okay, so let's see some examples here so that we better illustrate which type of cost will go into which kind of categorization or classification. Okay, suppose you started your own snowboard factory. Okay, your factory produces snowboard. People use snowboard for at the ice range. I mean the snow ranges. Okay. We don't have snow ranges in Malaysia, probably in China, I'm not sure. Here are some of the costs that your snowboard factory would incur. Assign the following cost. Okay, so one kind of cost is material cost per board. So the material used for board, so this is part of direct materials. Okay, and then there's the labor cost. Okay, so labor cost, the cost of the people in the factory to produce the snowboard. So this is part of the direct labor. Depreciation on factory equipment of 25,000 per year. This is part of the manufacturing overhead. And then there's the other costs like property taxes on factory building. Remember, see, this is a factory building. So this property tax, the tax on the factory building, is essential for the manufacturing purpose, because if we don't pay tax on the factory, then we are operating the factory illegally. Okay, we have complications later on. So this is actually part of the manufacturing, but it's not directly related to the product, but it is nevertheless it is essential for the manufacturing process. So this is part of manufacturing overhead. Advertising cost is done outside of the factory. okay, whether the factory runs or not, then people can still make advertising. Okay, so it is not part of manufacturing overhead. Definitely not direct materials or direct labor, so it is part of period cost. Okay, sales commission again is about selling, so this is period cost. Maintenance salaries, but then maintenance salaries of the factory facilities. Okay, so this is essential for running of the factory. Without maintenance, then the factory might face problems, cannot function. Therefore, is part of manufacturing overhead. Then the salary of the plant manager. Again, this is part of the plant. Plant is another word for factory. Okay. So if the plant manager is not given salary, then the plant will not work properly. There will be haywire in the running of the factory. Therefore, it is part of the manufacturing overhead. And then the cost of shipping board. Okay, the cost of shipping board. So the boards, but the boards are not called shipping boards. It is the cost of shipping the boards to the customers or to the retailers. Okay, so this is regarding the transportation of the finished product to the customer. So it is not related at the manufacturing level, but it is related to the distribution level, at the selling level. So this is not part of manufacturing overhead, but instead it is part of the period costs. Okay, so when we try to calculate the manufacturing costs, okay, when we try to calculate the manufacturing cost, we will have the material cost. Let's say the company produces 10,000 snowboards in the first year. What would be the total manufacturing cost? We have the material cost of $30. We have seen this in the previous two slides. So the manufacturing cost of the material would be 300,000. And then the labor cost, $40 per material, $40 per unit of snowboard. So we times that, we will get 400,000 of manufacturing cost. And then depreciation of factory equipment, that is part of the manufacturing overhead. So it is 25,000 we add to the manufacturing cost. We have the property taxes, 6,000. We have maintenance salaries, and we have salary of plant manager. So when we total up the direct material cost, the direct labor cost, all of these for manufacturing overhead, then we will get the total manufacturing cost of $846,000.